AwLearn is Advertising Week's year-round, video-on-demand continuing education platform.
Doesn't matter how many times you fail, you only have to be right once.
Our collections of chapter-based videos organized into smart tracks and highly refined courses provide discovery paths to the industry's brightest minds from across the globe.
The solutions are now widely available.
AwLearn features best-in-class thought leadership, the latest industry trends, and indispensable knowledge that will supercharge your professional development.
All right, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. My name's Chris Morris. I'm a contributing writer for Fortune Magazine, CNBC, and a few other publications. Excuse me. I've covered the video game industry for about 25 years now and sort of been watching the rise of esports for quite some time. I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves and tell a little bit about themselves and their companies. Let's start with Chris here, if we could.
Hi, I'm Chris DiApollonio. I work for Triggerfish. We're the partnerships arm for Infinite Esports and sell for properties like Optic Gaming, the Houston Outlaws, and the Overwatch League, and a few others. We also have a stadium we're building in Arlington, Texas, that'll open in November.
Hi everyone, I'm Brian Kim. I'm the general manager of GumGum Sports. GumGum Sports is a technology-driven sponsorship valuation platform. So we help sponsors and teams understand how much their sponsorship activations are across linear TV, streaming platforms, and social media.
Hi, I'm Chris Dowell. I'm the Chief Product Officer at FanAI. We do a lot of the audience analytics in the esports space, looking at who's watching what their purchasing habits are, what else they're interested in, trying to really unlock who the audience is.
Brad Siv, Chief Revenue Officer at Team Solamid. We're a leading esports team in North America, and we also have websites, influencer network, and competitive teams.
Ann Hand, I'm with Super League Gaming. Super League, think of it as the Little League and Minor League system. So while Brad helps drive revenue at the professional level, we're really about the mainstreaming of esports and going after the 2 billion plus gamers around the planet.
So before we jump into the questions, I want to do a quick poll of the audience. How many of you have watched or maybe attended an esports tournament so far? All right, fair number. How about in terms of sponsorship? How many have sponsored a team or a tournament? One back there.
I want more hands in the future.
That's your job. That's what we started here for today.
That's true.
All right, so we've got a few questions we're going to get through, but if you've got any questions in the audience, you can use the Slido app, and those will come through. So feel free to contribute as they come to you. Let's kick it off with sort of a 500-foot overview, and that is, what are the differences in sponsoring an esports team versus a traditional sports team? And I guess the best place to start, Brad, is with you.
Sure. A couple different, I worked for ESPN for a long time, so I'm pretty familiar with sponsoring a traditional sports team. Esports is different in a sense. You're dealing with a digitally native audience. A lot of times with a sports team, you're dealing with in-stadium signage, you're dealing with, potentially now a logo on the jersey. There's different assets. When you're dealing with an esports team, it's totally different. You're dealing with it's a lot of social media. You're dealing with, let's say Twitch and in-stream integration, overlays. You're still dealing with logos on the jersey and some traditional elements. So there's a lot of different pieces to the pile. I think also to take a step back, taking a look at a sponsorship with an esports team, there's different buckets that you're going to play in that's different than traditional sports. So you basically will have, for instance, our League of Legends team, Bjergsen, is one of the top players in the league. He'll actually be in competition for a good part of the season, really focus on scrimmaging and getting better, streaming very rarely. So your sponsorship is more on the competitive side. But then when he's off season, or actually when he has free time, he'll be on Twitch just streaming to the fans, and then your sponsorship lives in a totally different environment that you do not get in the professional sports arena. So just imagine if you actually could put, I'll use Steph Curry, he's an investor in TSM. So if you could actually watch Steph Curry practice with a GoPro on his chest and ask him questions and see him get better, that's kind of the different experience you get when you're participating with in a sponsorship with an esports team.
Christelle, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the other thing that's kind of significantly different is that you're addressing an audience in esports that isn't available elsewhere. These people who are largely cord cutters, disconnected from traditional means of kind of advertising to them. And I think while sports sponsorship is kind of well understood, we're still proving out how best to address those people.
Let me give you just a 500-foot view. We had a lot of people that have been to esports, but let's kind of put this in perspective numbers-wise. So this is poised to be a $1.5 billion industry by 2020, according to the market research firm Newzoo. Back in 2015, this is 3 years ago when it was just starting to build, the number of people that watched the League of Legends World Final was more than the number of people who watched the NBA Finals by 5 million. So to capitalize on that, since then, we've seen a lot of networks, including NBC, ESPN, TBS, regularly air esports programming on their networks as well as through their streaming networks. Now, you talked about Twitch. Last year, viewers watched, this is a staggering number for me, 292 billion minutes watching programming online. I did some math. That works out to 479,452 years of watching Twitch. You're seeing companies invest in this. Fox just put $100 million into Caffeine, which is an as-yet unlaunched video streaming service that's hoping to take on Twitch. And you're starting to see an expansion beyond just the esports arena. There's a lot of talk about competitive video gaming becoming a part of the Olympics. The IOC met earlier this year to consider it, and it's going to have full medal status in the 2022 Asian Games. It is a demonstration sport this year. So it's growing at a pretty phenomenal rate right now. And I guess the next place that I want to ask is for you, Brian. We talked about Twitch and social media, and that kind of adds to the connectivity of this sport. What are ways that you've seen to sort of make this quantifiable and impacting a brand's sponsorship?
I think, compared to sponsorship TV, it's important to understand that because of that connected ecosystem that you live in, like you have things like comments or ways to interact on a one-to-one basis that you don't have in traditional TV. Brad was talking about earlier, imagine being able to talk to Steph Curry every single time he practices, or being able to talk to LeBron James. Like that is a level of engagement that has to be valued very differently than being able to just watch a TV sporting event and just being able to visually see a sponsorship coming up there. So I think from our perspective as a valuation platform, it's really around educating sponsors and brands that there's a different level of value that's associated to that kind of connected ecosystem that you're living in, compared to just thinking about having a State Farm logo showing up on a basket every gameplay.
And how does that impact what you're doing? Because as you said, you're kind of the farm teams, the Little League right now.
Yeah, I mean, just to put some of your stats in perspective, if you look at the amount of gaming content consumed online, it's greater than Hulu, ESPN, and Netflix combined. And when we talk about that 1.5 billion as the projected revenues for the industry, that's like quantifying the value of baseball globally and only looking at the major leagues and leaving out Little League, minor league, college, high school. So when they talk about the size of the esports pie, it is still so undefined because there's 13,000 professionals around the world. That's the most elite play. But then you've got this entire base of under 18s that are trying to start to contemplate an aspirational path to the pros. And so, when I talked earlier about the mainstreaming of esports, that's really the rally cry of our firm. If you just even look at the wide psychographic mix, these days everyone's a gamer. That's just kind of the way it is. And the thing too is that unlike when I hung out at the arcade growing up, my parents presumed I would grow out of it, and I kind of did. But it's changed now. So gaming is now a lifestyle decision. You're not going to grow out of it. And so for us, really, our mission is to tap into the youth and the young adult and really try to give a direct bullseye target for marketers that are trying to reach those that very elusive audience that folks talked about.
It's funny, and you mentioned that I was an arcade babysat by the arcade as well.
Yeah.
And
Go Galaga.
Exactly. You heard parents then, and you even hear parents these days saying, you need to do something that's going to help you get on with your life. And this is becoming a viable profession. And, to kind of go with your analogy of Little League versus pro, there's also a major expansion going on right now with collegiate esports.
That's right.
42 schools have programs right now. The NCAA is actually thinking about overseeing that down the road. So
yeah,
it's
66
evolving.
universities today offer esports scholarships. Now, it's not because the average college student getting one of those scholarships is going to necessarily be a pro, because right now the professional esports athlete peaks around 21 to 22 years old. So actually finding somebody in college might be a little too late. So finding the next kind of 15, 16, 17-year-old is essential to really drive the franchise values of these professional teams. And so that's why the ecosystem can only thrive and reach its maximum potential as we start to kind of cultivate the future esports fan and that pipeline of talent. But, I really would say, having run over 2,000 experiences for gamers over the last couple of years, the most profound thing that parents say for our youth league over and over again is really two points. One is thank you, because I knew he or she loved this game. I can't stand over their shoulder in their room and watch them play. So you've given me a way to participate in this in a positive way, and it's now become permissible dinner conversation to talk about why you like this game, what you're learning about strategy and other kind of good skill development. And the second thing is I've had a lot of parents say, I feel badly, I had it all wrong. I thought this was my son or daughter that wasn't competitive.
Got it.
Because I was seeing them through a lens of traditional sports. And so it's just been kind of very moving to see how we're able to wrap a safe, positive wrapper around gaming and show it can be a fair, inclusive, positive experience for kids.
And to that point, a lot of the universities, when you do talk to them, see this as something that's in addition to their STEM programs. And it does bring a competitive aspect to that that's different, because there's a lot of kids that are out there right now that aren't going to be great at the traditional stick and ball sports, but they're amazing at video games and strategy and different things like that. So in the past it was like, okay, do the chess club. Well, now when you're playing League of Legends, it's 4D chess on a massive scale with a lot of teamwork. So it's an evolution.
And sorry, to jump in, and on a sponsorship side, companies and advertisers, brands are looking to get involved as a recruiting tool, not just a brand awareness or sales tool.
All right, so let me have you continue that. What are the challenges that they face?
Challenges are speaking to the audience in the proper way. That's where teams like ours and Brad's come in and kind of help integrate brands authentically, and which is a terrible word to say, but it's like the esports word du jour, I guess, organically in our lifestyle content, where it's a natural extension of what our players are doing, and making sure that the message comes across, but not in a way that's too corporate.
Yeah. Brian, what have you seen? You're kind of looking at this from your perspective.
Sure. I mean, I would say it's probably one of the biggest opportunities for a sponsor to what Chris was mentioning earlier, because much like you think about TV commercials being translated to pre-roll and those assets just being leveraged for a digital advertising audience, the same kind of process is being thought of, I think, kind of in its infancy right now, of taking traditional sponsorship placements and moving them over to esports. But I do think from the brand perspective, they should be thinking about really opening the box and being a little bit more creative and how to make that more integrated into a social media post or anything else that they're doing with one of their organizations.
Yeah, to absolutely agree with it. It's, I think a lot of people, 5 years ago, another kind of, hot term marketing was contextually relevant creative. I actually think it really applies to esports. And, you want to be organic, but how do you do that? You make it contextually relevant. So for instance, if you're dealing with, a Fortnite audience, you have to actually speak to them in a totally different way you would a League of Legends audience, and be really in tune with that. So a lot of the times at TSM, we are educating as consultants just as much as trying to go out and sell something to brands on these are the areas you should be in if your goals are X, Y, and Z. And then, this is what our brand is. This is what the League of Legends audience looks like. Here are some ideas that we can kind of integrate your brand into it organically. And we do have a tip jar every time we say we actually put $5 in it at our place. But you have to do that, because you will, as you've heard many times, if you go into the ecosystem and you try to take a model and just the stick and ball model or different sponsorship model and place it in there, it just won't resonate well, and you just won't get the results that you want.
Yeah, I think you're alluding to something really important there, Brad, as well, which is that we talk about esports as if it's another thing alongside the existing sports, so NBA, NFL, and then esports, and that's absolutely not the case. There are huge differences between genres, huge differences between games, and knowing which property to pick if you're looking at sponsorship is critical, and then knowing how to engage once you do so is if anything, even more important.
Yeah, I really want to get into that too, because a lot of companies don't understand video games, and knowing they want to get into esports is one thing, but then choosing the game that they're going to be a sponsor of. You don't necessarily want to be a sponsor of a Call of Duty or something like that if that's going to go against your brand messaging. So have you found, and why don't I go with you again here, Chris, have you found that that is an education that has to occur before a sponsorship takes place?
Sure. I think, the education process is definitely something that we're doing as we're contacting brands and agencies. When you look at a lot of brands don't want to compromise their morals and go with games that maybe are red blood or realistic shooters, which is understandable. But there's a lot of ways to get around that. I think, we've done programs. We have a very popular Call of Duty team, but not everybody wants to be associated with Call of Duty. We've been able to integrate brands in a way that has 0 seconds of gameplay footage. So you're talking to the audience and speaking with them and connecting with them, but you're not associated with any of the first-person shooter aspects of the games. And I think it's not like a traditional sport where like you're on the broadcast of an NFL game. You're really kind of showcasing the lives of the esports athletes to the fans and letting them connect in a way that they maybe don't necessarily get to do otherwise, and it gets you outside of the gameplay that's maybe offensive.
Just to jump on that really quickly, having sat on the other side, formerly running large global brands, I mean the thing I say to, and I would like to say to the CMO out there or the agency is you'd be quite surprised if you just open up your thinking a little bit, because I get it. It's kind of, it feels a little risky or different to kind of get behind esports if you've traditionally been an NCAA sponsor, but it's really not that different. The same people you're going after around your March Madness promotion are video gaming as well. And to the point of genres, there's such a diverse amount of game genres out there. So don't think of it as first-person shooter games, right? So many of these games are strategy. One of our best sponsor relationships is with Nickelodeon. They're also investors in us. We have a great relationship with Mattel, and it's all around Minecraft, which is where kids are learning the basics of Java and 3D modeling, and that's used increasingly in schools. We have great relationships with Red Bull and Logitech and AMD and others for our adult leagues. So I think you'll be really pleasantly surprised at the diversity of audiences, and I think the genre is a way, picking the right game title is the way to really kind of have something that matches up with what your brand stands for.
Have you had a sponsor, either of you two, have you ever had a sponsor pick a game and then realize we made a mistake, we should have picked a different game?
No, thank goodness. No, but like I think I'll give a real world example. So we work with Dr. Pepper, and they were sponsoring MLG years ago, and they're looking to come back in, and they're trying to figure out where's the best place to plant the flag. And so we used Fan AI data to say this is the demographics, what they look like, this is how they align. And then what we would do is kind of work that out and then make them feel really comfortable about the the demographic, the audience. You can use certain survey methods. So I think it's beholden to TSM, or if it's Super League or whomever, Chris, also to actually provide the information to the brands right now, especially since it's in a nascent stage, and a lot of the non-endemics are really right now thinking, should I get in to this space? There's a lot of pressure and talk around it. What should I do? I think that's super important, and so we've used that type of approach with a lot of our brands, even ones that have been with us for years, like a Geico, a Gillette, really blue chip ones, to help crystallize what they're doing and say, yeah, this is correct, or sometimes we're going to alter the plan a little bit to make sure that we're on point. And then I think the second part of it is, and obviously we work with Gum as well, is how do you measure it? How do you have a very transparent measurement system that everyone knows what it looks like, so we can have a one-to-one conversation, number one, when we're evaluating what the sponsorship looks like, and number two, when we're trying to renegotiate a sponsorship. And I think that's really important in our industry right now as we kind of build up and get bigger, because it's going to be explosive growth. The scale's really large. So we need the kind of infrastructure and systems in place to be able to measure it, but also have proper realistic negotiations.
Yeah, and that leads into my next question for you, Brian. How do you measure this? You can't just look at ratings like you would for an NFL sponsorship or something like that. So how do you quantifiably measure the success of a campaign with something like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, one, you have to think about the medium that you're playing in. So I'll give Twitch as an example. Twitch is very unique in the sense that they have a lot of underlying data about their audience itself, including concurrent viewership numbers and all that data. Our approach is that we actually leverage computer vision tech to be able to analyze the footage, which could, for a typical player, could be up to 16 hours worth of practice time that they're doing every day. But with that concurrent viewership numbers, you can get back to what is effectively a CPM, or kind of common denominator methodologies that a brand would be used to, and seeing what that value is. I think on the social media side, I think we're all trying to figure out the best way to take this approach, but a lot of it does kind of look at what is the value of that post that I'm being associated with in comparison to if I were to purchase that as advertising on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, any of these platforms. And I think a lot of what Fan AI works on that is like, how do you understand who is that audience that you're reaching as part of the millions of followers that you actually have? Because that's key in basically understanding, am I hitting a domestic audience, am I hitting an international audience, a global audience, am I hitting people that are between 18 to 24 or 18 to 55, right? So a lot of that data kind of goes into that bucket of figuring out what the value is that I'm getting back.
Yeah, and you touched on the Twitch side of things and valuing how people are viewing Twitch. Obviously, there's a need for kind of parity between existing measures and what you're doing on Twitch, but there's also so much more insight inside when it comes to selecting the right properties to sponsor and being kind of differential on that axis.
Christy Apollonia, tell me, how do you suggest people balance their portfolios? How do they pick the right games? How do they figure out the best way to spend their money?
Well, I mean, it starts, I think, with understanding the audience, understanding your objectives. What do you want to accomplish, and what are your ways to measure that? And then you can kind of narrow that down, I think, and figure out where your playground is. There's multiple areas you can go, from the team side to working with a tournament organizer to the grassroots side in the Super League, to just doing things on Twitch and other media platforms. So it's really trying to understand what you're trying to achieve, and then you can drill down from there.
Okay, fair enough. Esports, like any sports, has its heroes, and we're starting to see those emerge, whether they're teams, whether they're individual players. Is it time to create a LeBron James as a marketing device in the esports world yet? And let me have you kind of start that, because you're starting with the younger audience.
No, it's just like any other sport. The human interest, the player backstories are where you get that real kind of deeper brand loyalty and stickiness. And so, right now we're working with a couple brands on designing a high school championship, and it's going to be really geared around finding the next LeBron, and how do we integrate with the pro teams so that they almost become our scouts and coaches as we're trying to cultivate that future fan. That's the nice thing, I think, because the terrain is so open right now in esports. The opportunity for a brand isn't just in traditional sponsorship, it's actually to partner with these early kind of companies who've jumped into the space and actually create real franchises, real products that can have a multi-year, legs to them. But I do think the backstory around finding the next esports athlete and celebrating the individual players is essential for the overall health of the whole ecosystem.
Okay. You guys have all come for this from a different perspective. I'm interested, and we'll keep it relatively short because we're on time, but I want to get all five of you to answer the most successful integration you've seen when it comes to marketing and esports. Chris, you want to go first?
Not necessarily, but okay.
You picked the wrong seat, my friend.
Well, selfishly, I will go with T-Mobile and the Houston Outlaws. So T-Mobile, presenting sponsor of the Houston Outlaws in the Overwatch League this season. They were a jersey partner, and there's face cams in the Overwatch League. And when our players came out in the new jerseys and showed off the logo, the fans started chanting T-Mobile. And every time we won a match, they continued to chant T-Mobile. And they started to co-op our logo, which was similar to the Texas Longhorns logo, but instead it had the T-Mobile T in the middle. So I think the affinity that was there for T-Mobile coming in and sponsoring our club was really unprecedented.
Good. Ryan?
I'm actually going to answer the opposite question, which is maybe the most unsuccessful, or I guess the most biased view. So we work with a team and a brand who, honestly, the brand thought about just investing in a sponsorship with a team just for their competitive play. And that team actually got bounced pretty early on in one of the tournaments that they were in. And the brand thought that they missed out on the entire opportunity because they just thought of that as the only way that they could sponsor with a team. So it was really more about educating to all the stuff that we've talked about here around the practice gameplay, social media, and all the other ways that they could think about activating with the team, and that they shouldn't be so focused on just the tournament gameplay, because I think that is a very singular opportunity that you can do, and not one that encompasses kind of the true value of what esports brings to the table. So, education point for everyone.
Chris?
Yeah, I'll dodge the question as well. I think that there's a lot of successful integrations out there, and I think one of the big barriers to brands getting in is this word authentic that gets bandied around and really shouldn't. And the idea that that's a hard thing. You look at the endemic sponsors who have been there for a while, and they're not necessarily endemic because they're applicable to gaming. Sure, the Intels, the AMDs are, but we think of AT&T as an endemic sponsor. They're just endemic because they've been around for a while and they've figured out how to do it. I think that it's actually not as difficult as people initially believe to do a good activation in esports.
I agree. I'm gonna use Dr. Pepper TSM, of course, but no, I think that was one of the best things we've done, and the reason why is a short time frame. So we signed a deal with Dr. Pepper in December, and then we had to ramp up in first quarter creative. So we did something called Team Soda Mid. So we basically dressed our League of Legends players up as like Power Rangers and did this crazy stuff. Fans went wild. It was a big custom shoot. It was a huge undertaking. It was frankly the first time TSM has ever done something like that, and really trying to show flexibility of creative and really kind of bringing the brands together, not take ourselves too seriously, which is good for our audience. And then another kind of opportunistic, obviously Fortnite has blown up. Fortnite to me is probably one of the most exciting things about gaming, because it crosses, you have esports and you have gaming and you have pop culture, and it shot through all three of those. And early on, we were one of the first people in January to get in there, built a huge team, and so next to Ninja, we have the second largest market share when you look at Fortnite with influencers. We have a website, etc. And so with Dr. Pepper, we were talking about the growth of Fortnite, and they're like, we're talking to creative agents, like, can we wrap the Dr. Pepper bottles with the faces of your Fortnite players and just send them to them? They can tweet it out. We're like, let's do that. So really spontaneously, we put it up there. It was the most engaged tweet in Dr. Pepper's history, over 50,000 tweets, which is massive. And then Myth, who's one of our big streamers, got on, did an in-stream shout-out, called it Swagalicious, and that went viral through the internet. And those little things like that are massive impact and can really kind of push a sponsorship forward. So I think for us, it was really a proud moment, is the flexibility of creativity and being spontaneous and owning the moment when you have a sponsorship and taking advantage of it and working with a partner on that. So for us, that was most successful.
Nice. Two quick integrations that we did. First, for our youth league, 6 to 14-year-old demographic, to your point about the LeBron question, Nickelodeon just wrapped up following 4 of our kids across the country who all have a desire to be a professional esports player one day, so highly aspirational, but we'll be launching a YouTube series on Nickelodeon's YouTube channel in November, and you'll kind of watch those kids get into their homes, meet their families, and kind of understand the different dynamics they bring, and that's very entertaining to watch 12-year-olds freaking out about Minecraft. And then the second thing, and it really just shows the heart of it, that these are just really rich, engaging content opportunities, is Red Bull now, each season that we run, when we find the best gamers across the country, this is for our older product, obviously 16 to 34-year-olds around League of Legends and Clash Royale. After we've identified the best talent across the country, they fly the top 20 to Red Bull Studios in Santa Monica, and they hold an all-star weekend. So just playing off all-star weekends and properties that work in traditional sports, we bring in pro teams, we let them scout, and again, all of that content of that all-star weekend is being live streamed on Twitch and other channels.
Brian, I want to ask you, since we're getting a little close here, what are the opportunities that esports presents that you're not going to find anywhere else?
I mean, big one we talked about, I think, obviously, is Twitch as a whole. It's a very different platform than anything else out there when it comes to the one-to-one level of interactivity you can have with a player. I think Super League Gaming, obviously, is another one of just the breadth of the audience that you can reach when it comes to amateurs or people who are kind of thinking about getting to the esports space itself. And I think to what everybody here talked about, I think the approach that esports organizations and everyone has done is to really make a little bit more integrated that social media presence and experience that you can actually design, which might be a little bit different than what people traditionally think about from an influencer marketing standpoint, because the orgs do also as well have a little bit more control about what influencers are doing, and I think that comes with more creativity and an opportunity for brands to really come up with something that could be spontaneous and amazing that you can in other spaces.
We've talked a lot today about, made a lot of comparisons between esports and traditional sports. And so I want to wrap this up, or we're close to wrapping it up. So if you have any questions, be sure to send those in now. Chris, is that a good analogy? Because they are two different things. You've got Twitch, you've got YouTube streaming. I see, of course, why we make that analogy, but is that the best analogy in terms of marketing these days?
It's probably one of the closest ones, just because you have the competitive structure that's similar to traditional sports. But I think esports itself is an entertainment medium, and it's just something that is taking eyeballs away from other forms of entertainment right now. So it does have a traditional professional league structure with teams and players and fans and an audience, but at the end of the day, it's just another form of entertainment that people seem to be gravitating to in droves right now.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good analogy, particularly with the way that the teams and the organizations are maturing at the moment. Bringing in people like Brad, TSM, and the guys at Infinite have some of the best setup organizations around. And that model looks very sports team-like, has a lot of the same functions, a lot of the same approaches to things. I think from a sponsor perspective in particular, it's a very neat analogy because of the way that's working out.
Okay.
When I joined Super League a few years ago, I probably spent too much time worrying about gamers being different than traditional sports, and worried that I was going to apply things that an avid gamer would reject. And I wish I hadn't wasted that much energy doing that. We introduced the notion of city teams. We have a city league, so we have 16 city teams that we own across North America. So if you play in LA, you play for the LA Shockwaves. Play in New York, you play for the New York Fury. Those are uniting city-based brands for the whole community, whether you're a kid or you're an adult. We have parents that play in our adult leagues in the same city, and their children play in our youth league. So again, the multi-generational effect of gaming is kicking in. And what's been interesting to me is, even though each of these game titles have these really interesting kind of subcultures to them, and some are edgy and a little darker, and some are a little bit more, upbeat or positive. What's interesting is that the one thing that is universal as a human truth is we all have a desire to represent and root for our hometown. Like, that beats your love of a game title. And so we found that by tapping into that lack of locality for gamers, it's such a fragmented local community, and creating those unifying brands, it's now kind of positively wrapped a wrapper around this diverse audience of gamers in a compelling way. So that's another nice entry point for a brand, because you can kind of grow up with the gamer then. You can get behind the younger gamer, but also start to be relevant to the older gamer at the same time.
Well, let me play into that, and I'll just toss this out and let anyone take it. But to make that comparison to professional sports teams, you see people wearing a Yankees jersey or a San Francisco 49ers. Is there a lot of that sort of merchandising going on right now in esports?
Yeah.
So, yeah, there is. I mean, you take a look at merch sales are really important to teams, you know, and it's number one, it's revenues, it's good, but it's a barometer of your fandom, right, and how much you're pushing out there. You know, like I know, you know, for TSM, we have a very traditional jersey that we haven't changed, right? And so I know other teams try to change their jerseys up a lot. So there is analogies when you're talking about just pure, like, you know, the apparel and what people are trying to do. But I think more importantly, it's you're having different fans in different games. So for instance, you know, we have, you know, Leffen, who plays Smash, which is a fighting game community. They buy different merchandise than the people at League of Legends, and they like different stuff. And it's a jersey, but so it is a very different type, you know, of community. And so, like, if you're talking about the fandom, which I think is important, you know, fandom is not about going into a lot of different games if you're an org. It's about what you do in those games and how you organically, socially grow that audience. And your players have something to do with it, but it's more about who your brand is and identifying that. And I think, you know, what I'm seeing a lot right now, there's a lot of new teams out there. And they're taking their time, and Ann is an expert at this. She's growing this league and these new teams and these new brands. It takes time to kind of, you know, ramp those up. But if you are really focused and have a good plan, you know, then you'll grow that audience. But right now, there's a lot of kind of, you know, people that are, you know, trying to figure that out.
Right. I see what questions here. Let me let's see. Let's jump in with this first one, Anonymous. How significant was the addition of franchising in games like League of Legends to activate brands? We've got like a minute and a half left, so Ryan, why don't you take that one?
I actually don't think I'm the best advisor
Okay.
to that, so I'll jump over.
I'll do it. So Legends activation, the franchise, how you know, I think it's in its kind of growth stage right now, to be honest with you. I think it was, you know, good to solidify it, because if you didn't know, what happened is if you were the bottom tier of the league, you could get relegated, right? So the problem for brands, which was really bad, was all of a sudden you spend all this money in this team, and the next year they don't do that well. Then they go into the minor leagues, let's say the academy level of League of Legends, and you lost that investment, and they're not up at the higher level. So I think for brand protection, I think it was really good. I think for structuring and make it better for the players, I think it was really good, because the first year of franchising, we saw movement like we've never seen, and we saw salaries go up. So I think overall it was good for the ecosystem to kind of structure it. I think what we're going to see in the second year coming in and third year is better brand integrations, partnerships, those type of things. So State Farm came on the first year with Riot, which was great. MasterCard just announced a $25 million global deal. There's more to come. So I think, you know, over time it'll be a really good thing for the league.
I think just stick my token Brit note in for a second. There are other models as well. You know, outside of the US, franchising is not the de facto way of approaching sports leagues. And I think what we've got now is a really good situation where we've got a balance between Overwatch League and ALCS, EULCS on the one side that do have that model, and things like Dota, which is a much more community and kind of collegiate way of approaching it.
Yeah,
Right.
Fortnite is certainly doing the democratization approach, much like Dota.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to end it right there. I'm afraid we're out of time. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I'm sorry we didn't get to all your questions.